And good evening, and welcome once again to the Shadow Gallery. I am, as always, your host, James Donnelly. And this is one of those things I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks, and wanted to finally just kind of get it out there because I know I have things to do and comics to read, particularly still of Mig's care package that he sent to me. But basically, what we're going to be talking about here tonight, because I did a video that you may remember from, I don't know, way back when we basically around when we were doing the Watchmen comic book community crossover event, and now and I talked about 1986, and that was basically the year that changed everything for the future of comics, for better or for worse. So now I'm going to talk about, well, basically two comics of the 1990s that I think changed everything going forward from there. And ironically, both of them share one person in particular. But I'll get to that. So here we are in the 90s. And what we see in the 90s, as the 90s begin, is that certain characters, of course, are at pretty much the height of their popularity. Characters like Batman, like Spider-Man, the X-Men, Wolverine, the Punisher. These are all characters that seem to just pop up everywhere. Batman, of course, in 1989, because of the film, it retook off, and it just really kind of just soared into the stratosphere as far as its popularity was concerned. But they still, and then they created a whole new book, Legends of the Dark Knight, which started out pretty poorly, but then, in the very next arc, Grant Morrison and Klaus Janson's Gothic was really incredible. But for the most part, it was still, Batman was pretty much, kind of in his own little thing, because obviously he was dealing with the death of Jason Todd and dealing with Barbara being put in a wheelchair and so on and so forth. So, but of course, on the Marvel side of things, you had Spider-Man. Of course, his dramatic leap in popularity very much due to the man Todd McFarlane. And this, of course, gave rise to the superstar artists, because you had Todd McFarlane was he became like the most sought after talent in the business. As far as an artist is concerned, they allowed him to create his own Spider-Man book just called Spider-Man, and it was awful because he chose to write it as well. You had then we were gradually introduced to other people like Eric Larson, and then over on kind of like you had Wolverine kind of in the the later 80s getting his own solo series, his own solo ongoing series, I should say. And you had Punisher still kind of, basically, if you wanted to, if you really wanted to get a great sales bump for your book, you would throw in one of these three characters. You would throw in Wolverine as a guest star, you would throw in Punisher as a guest star, you would throw in Spider-Man as a guest star, or you would actually have them team up in a particular issue or a particular arc. You know, for instance, you know, like I remember Punisher War Journal numbers, I think 5 and 6, or 6 or 7, where it's Wolverine versus the Punisher. And it was, I believe, that was Jim Lee on art, or it was Rob Liefeld. I can't honestly remember who. It was one of like the, you know, kind of young up and coming superstars. I believe it was Jim Lee. But and then you had, of course, then you had, you know, Claremont and Lee's, you know, and this was in 1990. You had Claremont and Lee's X-Men #1, which it's what, the biggest selling single issue of all time. You know, because I mean, if you know, because you get, for instance, you get Chris Claremont plus just about any other writer that maybe tops out at about 200, 300,000. You know, depending upon, you know, whatever the sales figures were for that time. But you know, you have a new X-Men book, and you have Jim Lee as the artist, and all of a sudden it explodes. So again, this was less about the writing, more about the art. And so this gave way, again, you know, to the big superstar artists. And that kind of really fucked with, you know, comics for a long time, because, you know, you had, you know, then, you know, Liefeld coming on board with, you know, New Mutants, and, you know, him kind of, you know, seeming to kind of ape the style of, you know, people like McFarlane and Jim Lee and Eric Larson, and, you know, creating Cable, and, you know, creating X-Force and everything like that. And, you know, these were huge selling books. And I remember I just, I don't remember exactly who I was communicating to with this. I think it was, I think it was Oddfellow's thoughts that we were kind of talking on Twitter about, you know, the post Liefeld Scott Snyder Twitter war, and you had, you know, and I recalled that basically, you know, in, you know, 1991 or 92, I sold the first appearance of Cable for like $63. And, you know, I went to my LCS kind of around when it opened up, or when I was first aware of it anyway, and they had that issue, like they had just like dozens of copies, and they were like all like $1 a piece or something like that. And I just thought that was so awesome, because it really showed, you know, because the explosion of comics in the 90s, because obviously, you know, Batman becoming a huge pop culture phenomenon, it started getting people into the comic book shops. And so, you know, local comic shops started to explode. You know, direct sales, you know, became obviously a huge thing. Again, for better or for worse, all of these things started to happen. The books became much more about style against substance, and then all of a sudden, then you had these massive, you know, quote unquote status quo changing events, which were not. And I'm not necessarily talking about the, you know, the kind of yearly event comic, but, you know, two things in particular, really, three really. Because you had, for instance, of course, you know, Spider-Man, the Clone Wars, or not the Clone Wars, the Clone Saga. Sorry, I'm getting my pop culture metaphors mixed. But might as well be called the Clone Wars, because that's really what it was. I mean, it was, you know, you had, you know, Peter Parker, you know, thinking that he's been the clone all along, and that Ben Reilly is really the real Peter Parker, excuse me, and you know, and this, you know, so again, it changed the status quo of this book, and then of course this led to Scarlet Spider, and so on and so forth, you know, of the 90s, and that was again very much more, you know, style over substance, and you had. And then on the DC end of things, so that really, kind of shook up the status quo for a while. And then on the DC side of things, you had two huge, phenomenal, news-making events, and those were the death of Superman, of course, and Batman Nightfall. So basically, you had two characters, your two arguably biggest characters, who are, one of them dies, basically killed by, okay, we're just going to bring in a villain that is so powerful and so whatever that that he can kill Superman. And then you have, of course, Bane again brought in, no previous connection at all whatsoever, and then only after that, of course, they build an actual arc around Bane to give him a reason for existing. Similarly with Doomsday. So everything from that era just kind of seemed like, okay, well, we're just going to put this stuff in, see how it sells, and then if it does really well, we'll just put in all this other stuff as an afterthought. And so to me, that just rang really, really false. And this is pretty much, and then of course you had the rise of Image Comics. And Image Comics was basically, okay, a lot of superstars, started jumping ship from Marvel, particularly from Marvel, because Marvel seemed to own most of the big artistic talent. You had, Silvestri and Wills Portacio, and of course McFarlane and Liefeld and Larson and Jim Lee, all kind of heading towards Image, then creating their own books and creating their own characters and creating their own titles, and many of them were just really insipid. They were really banal. Spawn was a comic that I hated. The only thing that Spawn ever birthed for me that I thought was any good or that was cool at all was the very brief HBO animated series of Spawn, which I actually loved. But for the most part, you had just this explosion of new comic companies, and there were so many titles on the shelves that it was just like it was impossible to pick one, and you couldn't. I had a friend from in the 90s, from that era, who literally spent and he was like an assistant manager at a Denny's, and he lived, I don't know how, but he lived with a roommate in a kind of a shitty apartment, but bought like $100 worth of comics a week. So it's like a lot of his paycheck every month just went to comics. I mean, he would just come in, to Denny's where me and my other friends were, and just stack about this high of comics. And it would say, this one sucks, and this one sucks, and this one sucks. But it had to buy them because it suddenly became a real collector's market. Because who knew what the next big thing was going to be, So I think there was an increasing amount of frustration amongst those who were in the business that said, you know what, nobody's really telling stories anymore. Nobody's telling literate, well thought out tales. And we need to get some of that back. And so, for instance, now you had, of course, in DC you had the rise of Elseworlds, which pretty much started with Batman. And there's way more Batman Elseworlds titles than there are for anybody else. And some of them were really good. Of course, my friend Brian Augustine's Gotham by Gaslight was kind of like the it was like the title for it was like the progenitor of the Elseworlds mayhem that would then ensue. And of course, this gave, for the first time, DC to really have the opportunity to do things that were not in canon with their characters, like Marvel had been doing for years with What If. And I've always loved the idea of what if tales because, it's taking them out of, their canon, their canonical work, and then putting them in these, other worlds, these other situations, and, in other time periods, so on and so forth. So this really gave DC the opportunity to do that, without creating a whole new limited series or whatever. These were things that could just exist outside of all established continuity. So, again, for better, mostly for better, I think, on DC's end. But then, like I said, I think there was a rise of people who were really demanding better storytelling. Because they weren't getting it in the popular comics. I mean, if you look at, some of the runs of some of the people that were doing, any one of these books, Dan Jurgens, Jim Starlin, so on and so forth. I mean, it was, David Michelini, and again, so on and so forth. And then Image literally, Image Comics literally was just that. It was Image. It was solely based around the art. The art was the selling point. Nothing else mattered. At least it seemed to me, because every Image comic that I would pick up felt like, okay, well, this is just the same old shit. Then Wildstorm, of course, came around, and again, it just felt like, okay, well, basically, DC is trying to kind of hone in on the Image market, with creating things like Wildcats and so on and so forth, which was not a book that I was ever a fan of. But to me, these were the two comics that started to plant the seeds, really, because they did not flourish until later. And I'm talking about within the major label companies, as far as Marvel and DC were concerned, because obviously DC had Vertigo, and that was a really big deal because it was stuff that was way beyond the pale for what they were doing in their mainstream books. But Marvel didn't have anything like that, and they weren't going to. And of course, you had Marvel nearly going bankrupt, or did go bankrupt, I believe. So, and this, I really have to thank Mark. I have to thank Ghost Critic for kind of bringing this back to me and really kind of kicking this whole thing off. To give me kind of the impetus to start talking about this, because he reviewed one of these books that I'm going to be talking about here, and like I said, it was just this little acorn that would eventually grow into a much mightier oak tree with the maturity of comics over the next. That didn't really take hold until the late 90s, and that's what we're going to start with. And we're going to start with a series that came out in 1994, and that is Kurt Busiek's and Alex Ross's Marvels. This, this book, which basically holds one of the things that's so fascinating about Marvels is that it actually holds to the history of each character and gives you an actual sense of passage of time, because this is not something that we got throughout these books, because obviously you can't have you can't start a comic book in in 1964 and then have, or even in this particular case in 1938 or 1939, and have them age normally, because I mean, Christ, I mean, Peter Parker would be in his 60s by now. So I mean, that's just, you can't do that. And now he's really only in his 30s. So whatever your ratios might be of, okay, how many years, of comics deem, how, 1 year of age for these characters. I don't have one, and I don't know if anybody else will, but I'm sure somebody will try and figure it out. And probably some people have, I'm sure. But those are people who are much, much, much more mathematically inclined than I would be. So Marvel's, like I said, what we have here is, we begin really with, kind of the story of the original Human Torch. And, Jim, would eventually be identified as Jim Hammond. And you see, we follow this photographer, Phil Sheldon, who is, it's, like I said, it's 1939. Just the Human Torch has just been introduced, and all of a sudden, New York they become very fearful in this new age of Marvels, because you have, just around when he appears, of course, you have the first appearance of Namor, Submariner, and, he's flooding New York City. I mean, this is something that, of course, when it was happening in the late 30s and early 40s, was very much, just kind of for kids. It was just like, okay, obviously this isn't happening. There's no reason to really treat it seriously, but, I mean, this is a man whose, Atlantean army is invading New York and flooding part of it, and, of course, this is something that was recently kind of dealt with in a couple of different ways. Of course, Namor himself personally, of course, under the influence of the Phoenix Force, floods Wakanda, and that has some real, it has some actual real consequences, or at least it will, I'm sure, someday soon. And you also have, but then you also had, Magneto in the Ultimate Universe flooding New York City. In Ultimatum. But again, we have, so, people were afraid of these people, and then all of a sudden here comes Captain America, and he changes the way that these kind of mystery men were perceived, because, prior to, it even discusses, prior to the Human Torch and everything, you had some other mystery men like the Angel and everything like that. But, these were kind of glossed over and pretty much forgotten. And, because in this new age of these superhuman beings, robots or these, men from the sea and whatever, who had wings on their feet and could fly and could flood entire cities pretty much. And you see a young J. Jonah Jameson, with the same hair and everything like that. And, and how he perceives the Marvels, and even how Phil himself perceives the Marvels, as they are something of a threat. But again, here comes Captain America to put a much more human face on the idea of the Marvels. And here we have the Invaders, where all of these guys team up. You have Namor, and you have the Human Torch, and you have Toro, and you have Bucky, and Union Jack, and so on and so forth, Wizard, and everything like that, who team up to to fight the Nazis, and to fight the Tojo and the Japanese army and everything like that. So they were stepping in, and they were stepping up to the plate, and everything was looking good for a while. And then later on, we have really a couple of decades that go by, even though it doesn't really seem that way in the book. And then we have the beginning of the mutant menace, and again, so we have we have the first appearances of Magneto and the X-Men, and their big fights and everything like that, and the disappearance of Captain America. and people are starting to feel very afraid. They're feeling very inferior. Bolivar Trask's his whole almost McCarthyist shtick, saying that mutants are going to be the death of us all, and so on and so forth. They are the next step in human evolution. They're going to eradicate all humans. So you have basically these somewhat trite events within the Marvel Universe being treated probably for the first time in a really serious way. And, of course, this, and it goes on and on, as far as, Phil Sheldon's life and so on and so forth. And, of course, have the marriage of Reed Richards and Susan Storm, and that was, this great moment. You have, Phil's kind of, evolving sensibilities in regards to the quote-unquote Marvels, is that, basically, 1 minute we're hailing them as heroes, the next minute we're smearing them all over the front pages and, just finding any way to tear them down to our level. So it's almost, it's very prophetic, the way that it does, kind of compare to, even, to modern media and our sensibilities about celebrity, and how it's much more interesting for us to watch a celebrity crash and burn really hard, as opposed to watch a celebrity do something that actually makes a difference in our lives. So, you have, and he's just really losing his taste for this, and, and then, we kind of culminate everything with, and then, of course, and we have, Galactus, versus the Fantastic Four, for the first time, and, of course, how horrifically frightening that was, because everybody thought it was the end of the world. Here comes Galactus and the Silver Surfer. They're coming to basically devour Earth and everything like that, and Reed Richards basically, and, of course, Uatu, the Watcher, fight him off and say Earth's essentially off limits to you. But where the book really ends with is kind of the defining moment for the Marvel Universe at that point. Because, just going through, like, my Marvel collections from the 70s, I'm not talking about, like, actual physical issues, but I have, like, my Marvel's Essentials, my big, huge collections. I have a lot of those. And, it gives you a great feeling of what the comics were like at that point in time. And, so we have, the thing that really kind of shook everything to its core in, in the Marvel Universe, and that was the death of Gwen Stacy and the apparent death of the Green Goblin. That's really where Phil Shelton decides that, okay, this is the first time that I've seen, that I myself have personally seen, our heroes fail to save someone. And it was, it was a huge thing to do for Marvel Comics to begin with. To basically say, okay, well, this is a character that can't save everyone all of the time. He can't even save the woman that he loves. And, of course, we don't know that. I mean, Phil Shelton, from his perspective and our audience perspective, we don't know that. But, of course, we as fans of Marvel Comics, we remember all of these storylines, we remember all of these characters, remember what happened. But, he realizes for the first time, as we as the audience for Spider-Man during that time period, that, yes, this is a major turning point for everybody. Is that, it really raised the stakes. Is that basically it said that nobody really is safe. Anybody could die at any time. So I mean, it really brought home this idea of, you know, there are no necessarily expendable characters, but there are definitely characters that are beloved by, you know, hundreds of thousands, and all of a sudden they're dead. And, you know, that of course is, you know, is the real tragedy of this book. I mean, the most tragic event in this book is that it's, you know, it shows that sometimes the heroes lose. And it's a very bitter pill to swallow for everybody, which is why ultimately he just gets out of the business, stays with his family, and, you know, hopes that things don't get much worse. Marvel's was really the first attempt by anyone to really make those events seem very literate, to seem very smart, to be handled in a way with such grace, and with, you know, I mean, Busiek's prose work in this title is just amazing. And this, of course, is, we haven't even talked about Alex Ross's art yet, which is, you know, when Alex Ross paints, he is unmatchable. There is not an artist in the world, there's not a comic book artist in the world that can come anywhere near him, that can come anywhere near his painted work. It's photorealistic. I mean, you know, and literally so, because he actually, you know, in the trades and everything like that of Marvel's, you do get you know, he shows you, you know, his kind of like the photographs that he uses for certain poses for characters of, you know, real people that he's taken, and he uses those drawings to create, you know, the incredibly photorealistic art that he does. And some people might think that's kind of a cheat, but I don't, because it really doesn't matter how it comes about, you know, as opposed to like just tracing, because it really isn't. But, you know, it comes all down to the way that it feels when you're looking at it on the page. And how I feel when I look at it is I'm looking at something of great beauty and of, you know, amazing power. And that's what Marvel's really is. And that was, you know, for me, it was something that I discovered, unfortunately, long after it had been published. But it is one of those books that, to this day, is still incredibly important for the comics movement, particularly in, you know, and like I said, it didn't really, you know, this more kind of adult storytelling. It seemed, for, like I said, the mainstream books, this was very unusual, and it was something that felt, maybe at the time, almost sort of gimmicky, but it is anything but. And like I said, this started to, you know, to kind of pave the way for more realistic, more dramatic, more emotional storytelling within the main Marvel universe and the books that it's held within its grasp. You know, of course, many of the great titles that we read now owe a huge debt to Marvel's. So, now on DC's side, admittedly, like I said, they had Vertigo, which was changing things up. It was shaking some things up. It was giving us, you know, not a new status quo, but it was giving us something different to pay attention to. And, you know, it gave us these new books with these new ideas that were very, you know, adult-oriented, that were, you know, that were not, you know, that were completely outside, for the most part, of the main DC universe. And, you know, you had really significant creators that were doing some really, really good work. But there were only a very select few at that point in time. And, you know, I know that a lot of people that, you know, a lot of you who are out there who might be watching this, who grew up in the 90s reading comic books, might think that I'm completely out of my mind. Well, I'm not, but of course I understand the arguments, and I think that a lot of people, they tend to kind of view some of the things of the past with a little bit more rose-colored glasses, and that's fine, because again, this is all subjective. I'm not saying that these are the end-all be-all books of the 90s. I'm not saying that there weren't good works that came out, in the early to mid to even sort of kind of the mid-late 90s. And that, of course, that brings me to the next book that I'll be talking about, which, again, it's not part of... This is different because it's actually not part of canon. It's actually an Elseworlds book, but it takes us to a place with our significant DC characters, with our most important DC characters, quote unquote important DC characters, and presents them in a way that we can very realistically see that they would go in. And that brings us to Mark Waid and Alex Ross's, again, Kingdom Come. Now, Kingdom Come, this was 1997. I did actually get this when it came out in the individual issues, in 1996, excuse me. And because there was something about it that screamed, you need to get this. We have, again, as we did with Marvel's, we have a very human main character in which we follow him throughout all of these events of the that are to come, or that happen while this is going on. Because basically, Kingdom Come, as you may or may not know, if you have not read this, please do, because again, not only is it one of the most significant books of the 90s, it's truly one of the best books I've ever read of comics, period. Because basically what we have with what Mark Waid and Alex Ross do, what they create is a future where basically the catalyst of this is that we have a new generation of superhumans, and they are they're darker, they're more brutal, they do not respect life in the way that the fathers and mothers of this generation literally did. This is a world where Superman has basically, he's retired. He's gone away. He doesn't want anything to do with this new world because we have, this, like I said, this catalyst event in which the Joker comes to Metropolis, and basically he uses his, deadly laughing gas on the Daily Bugle, or the Daily Planet, and he kills just about everybody there, of course, including Lois Lane. And Superman comes to finally shut him down and bring him to trial. And of course, there's this other hero that is on the rise, this other seemingly superhuman, invulnerable being called Magog. And Magog, while the Joker is on the steps of the courtroom as he's being led in, smiling his eternal smile, is blasted by Magog and is killed. And the public basically comes out saying, yes, finally, someone has killed the Joker. Someone is finally taking these guys to task, and he's, so I mean, there's no longer any reason for us to worry about the supervillains, because they're just going to stay hidden away. because now they've seen on television and all the newspapers that there are quote unquote superheroes out there that are willing to kill. And Magog basically is responsible for the Superman's retirement, because Superman realizes that his method of truth and justice in the American way to the public is very outdated. It's very antiquated, and like someone even says, hey, does that S stand for senile? Because he is obviously older. He has streaks of gray running through his hair, and he's just he is cast aside, or not. He's cast aside by the public in favor of this new breed of superhero. But he basically decides, what? I don't want to have anything. I don't want to have anything to do with these people anymore. And then, of course, this leads this new this new generation of superpowered beings to basically start waging war, not on supervillains, but on each other. Even like the most petty of disagreements seems to elevate into something far out of their control. Now the book, essentially the narrative of the book begins with Norman McKay, who is there for Wesley Dodds, aka the Sandman, the Golden Age Sandman. And Norman McKay is a pastor, and he is he's been with Wesley kind of since he got sick, because he's a very old man now. And part of Wesley Dodds' abilities are kind of prophetic, and he sees that there is an Armageddon coming, and this is something that Norman McKay feels very very keenly inside of himself. And he's preaching to his parishioners who are looking to him for spiritual guidance. He's talking about the end of the world. He's talking about Armageddon in his sermons, and this is really turning some people off. And he's become lost. He has no idea of what the next thing that he can do is, because he's so filled with the fears of what Dodds's kind of final moments have given him. And once and at this moment of great despair, he is visited by the Spectre, who basically says, okay, well, I am no longer tethered to a human host, and I need someone who will guide me, because the apocalypse is coming. Armageddon is coming. And this is going to lead, basically the superhumans are going to get a glimpse of hope, but that hope will ultimately turn to ash. And this hope, of course, comes in the form of basically Superman. Magog has chased the Parasite, or at least this version of the Parasite, one of the few remaining supervillains, with his his own kind of justice group, whatever they call themselves, gang, really. Chased him into Kansas, and the Parasite is so frightened by everything that's going on around him that he lashes out, and he hacks open Captain Atom, and Captain Atom then explodes in a huge nuclear explosion, and it kills millions, and it irradiates a great deal of the Midwest. So this, this and of course visits from Diana from Wonder Woman basically spur him on to action. And each kind of hero of the of the Silver Age, as and some of the Golden Age, of course, starts to they've all kind of settled into their roles. For instance, the Green Lantern, Hal Jordan is kind of sitting up in this kind of emerald castle, if you will, far above the Earth, and is kind of silently waiting for threats from from other worlds. And you have the Flash, who's basically kind of disintegrated. Not disintegrated, but he is either, because this is around the time of the Speed Force, and of course Mark Waid was writing the Flash. And he's gotten to a point where he's moving so fast where he literally can he acts between the ticks of a second. Where crime within Keystone Central City is nil, because you have the Flash. He is constantly protecting everyone because he never stops moving at this like almost light speed. And then most especially you have Batman, who is kind of in almost this like this brace where he's almost kind of he's more machine now than man, but he's not twisted and evil. He's just created basically surrogates of himself, these huge like Batman, bat robots to pacify crime. And he is visited by Superman, who's looking to kind of get all the old leaguers together and say, hey, you're Batman, you're Bruce Wayne. I mean, you are everything that is great about humanity. And and of course Bruce and Clark have always had a very kind of not adversarial relationship, but they really they scrape off of each other. There's just they both manage to get under each other's skin, because Batman in one way or another has always viewed Superman as a threat, because if he goes bad, he is the end-all be-all. And so he he always has this in mind. He's very Batman is very human. And so Bruce Wayne is just kind of there, and he, as well as some of the really the only remaining kind of super villains, which are of course Lex Luthor. You have the Riddler, Catwoman, in their own guises. You have one of the sons of Ra's al Ghul, who may or may not be Damian as we look at it now. But you have this kind of conglomerate of kind of these pro-human, anti-superpowered beings that are looking to really bring the conflict between this new Justice League that Superman is leading and the again this new generation of superpowered beings. He's going to bring it to a head. They're going to bring it to a head, and it's the only way to truly deal with them is to destroy them all. And lo and behold, who joins up with them but Bruce Wayne? So the narrative of this story basically is that Norman McKay, as he is brought to these different places in kind of spiritual form with the help of the Spectre, and is allowed to be kind of a fly on the wall to many of these scenes and these conversations, and ultimately in with just Wade's style and his ingenuity, allows us to peek in, as opposed to just showing us scenes that would just that would seem very inorganic. But we do, of course, we are later kind of treated to those scenes. We have Superman basically coming down as almost not megalomaniacal, but that basically look, there's a way that we there's a responsibility that we have to the people, and we have to live up to that responsibility. And if you don't fall in line, you're done. You're going away. And of course, then that begins Superman's plan, Superman the Justice League's plans for their gulag that they're going to build in kind of the wastelands of Kansas. And you have the this ultimate battle between, which is a very kind of anticlimactic ultimate battle between Superman and Magog. And basically, Superman finally calls Magog out for being, far too zealous, and and just ultimately, as almost as amoral as the villains that he was chasing. And and Magog, feels, he, of course, he collapses in upon himself because he realizes only after, the destruction of Kansas and, millions of people dead, that he truly learns that Superman was right, that his way was better, and that if they, if the public hadn't so, exalted him to these high, these very high levels, that he wouldn't have felt the need to go on in such a very overzealous way. So, ultimately, they do build this gulag, and, everybody who does not fall in line is shipped there, except for kind of this almost secretive resistance of that Batman and people like Oliver Queen and Dinah Lance and Ted Kord kind of helped put together. And because he they want kind of a more democratic style, and his kind of secret Batman, he's the strategy man, remember. So I mean, this is his big secret plan to kind of, and ultimately it's discovered that he infiltrated he's infiltrated Luthor's group to find out exactly what they plan on doing, and also that there is this wild card of Billy Batson, who is, kind of always smiling this very eerie smile. Of course, he is, in his other persona, he is Shazam, who is potentially the only person on Earth that could defeat Superman in a fight. And so we have, basically, we finally have the gulag erupts because, basically the everything, as in a prison of this magnitude, where you have all of these rivalries, you have all of these very heated debates, and obviously the fact that they're in prison, it just having too much power in this small place, it's naturally going to boil over. And this is, of course, where Luthor plans to strike and use Shazam or Captain Marvel, because Captain Marvel is, since he is magically powered, and Superman's real vulnerability other than kryptonite is magic, he, again, is potentially the only person that can stop him. And, of course, we have this great moment where, Superman and everybody is racing towards the gulag to prevent it from spilling out, and, and to have the humans, us regular people, decide their fate for them. He is rushing to stop it, and McKay, as he's watching this, he's very engrossed in what's going on, and and he's really praying for Superman to get there in time and stop all of this. And of course, here comes this blast of magical lightning that knocks Superman down, and there is Captain Marvel just standing there, and there's just that the kind of inner monologue or the narrative of Norman McKay saying Armageddon has arrived. And this, of course, the fight that breaks out between everybody, because you have Superman and Captain Marvel are fighting each other to a standstill. You have Wonder Woman and Batman who are fighting each other. And of course, before all this, there is obviously hints that Superman and Wonder Woman are finally involved. They're finally having a bit of a love affair, and we have Batman basically saying look, this is to Wonder Woman, who has basically just taken a life of one of the imprisoned, and basically says, this is not, this is war now. It is beyond anything that we can control, and since these people are killers anyway, it's okay to start killing them. And she, as we learned earlier on, that she actually loses her royal station on Themyscira, and and Bruce actually makes this point to her while they're kind of fighting, while Bruce and Diana are fighting, as to that that by overcompensating, she's not going to win back her royal station. Of course, this infuriates Diana to no end, because she is, after all, a warrior, and she must, as always, prepare for war. Even Batman has these moments, again, these little digs at her about how forcing peace is kind of the tenet of Amazonian thinking. And so basically the UN, the humans, decide in their that the only possible solution to this is to nuke the Gulag and kill everybody there. And because it's the only way that they can take back any semblance of control of their world. And so they have these super duper nukes that they're planning on, that they're going to drop. And, as, and of course, as it approaches, there are three fighters that are loaded with these three super nukes. Batman and Wonder Woman knock down the first two, and Superman is trying to get to the last one, but is still embroiled in this fight with Captain Marvel. And then he finally is able to get through somehow to Billy, who has been mind controlled basically this whole time by Luthor. That he is now the only one that can stop the destruction of everybody, of all of these superhumans, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys. They're all going to die. And so Billy ultimately makes the final sacrifice, in which as he flies up to the heavens, he's screaming Shazam, Shazam, Shazam over and over and over, until it detonates this nuke, and it seems to be all over, except you have this great moment where Superman is just, he is basically realized that the nuke unfortunately did detonate, and it did destroy most of these people, and only very few were saved, and that was ultimately by Green Lantern, who was able to construct a bubble around as many people as he possibly could that could protect them from protect them from this nuke. And then Superman, and then this is where the Spectre says to Norman McKay, now your purpose is revealed. You are here to help me judge who is right and who is wrong. That's why the Spectre needs a human tether, is that he needs guidance as to who needs to be punished for this. Is the punishment Does it need to go at? Does it need to be directed at the superhumans, or does it need to be directed at humans? And this is where Norman McKay basically says, look, before we can do anything else, we have to stop Superman because he's heading directly towards the UN and he's going to tear the motherfucker down. And that's where you have this moment of where Norman McKay is finally really able to step out from underneath kind of the Spectre's cloak and speak directly to Clark and say, you're better than this. This is not the answer. If anything, this is only going to make things worse. And finally, Superman does see the reason there, and he sees that, and both the humans there and the superhumans see, both kind of realize, look, the humans are saying, look, we've looked at you as gods for too long. And Superman himself says, I think that we've allowed that for too long. Because ultimately we have to share this world together. And it's, it's a little bit flowery, but, a little bit fluffy, but it doesn't diminish the emotional impact of this book. Because basically what it's doing is it is setting up this futurescape for for all of these heroes to exist in, that is, whether or not it can be canonical is up for debate, because obviously you had Magog appearing and so on and stuff. You had like kind of the limited tie-ins of the Kingdom and everything like that, where you had the this book's Superman enter into the present world as opposed to just existing in this future world. And I remember reading The Kingdom and thinking it was quite poor, actually. But this work, In Kingdom Come, not only does it show the level of genius that Mark Waid is, and of course, the level of artistry that Alex Ross brings to every single goddamn panel of this book, which is just absolutely gorgeous. And you have you have this kind of coda in which Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman, the Trinity, meet at the Planet Krypton restaurant, in which Superman and Wonder Woman are about to announce that they're pregnant, and but Batman has actually already deduced that she is pregnant because she's put on a little bit of weight. And that's, again, it's Bruce Wayne. And so it ends on this message of real hope for the future. So it doesn't end in kind of darkness, but rather in ushering in a new age of light. Showing that the heroes that we love now are still heroes in the future. They're still as much heroes as they have ever been. Despite whether or not they have the physical ability to be what they were, they now have this other generation that they can now train and kind of leave it to them. But to also, herald, to be kind of the heralds of the bringing about of this new age. And of course you have this lovely little moment with the Jim Corrigan form of the Spectre with Norman McKay in Planet Krypton. Again, it's this wonderful little thing that I don't remember being in the original 4-issue miniseries. I think it's just in the trades. You're going to want to correct me if I'm wrong. I have to actually go back in my individual issue boxes and try and find these issues of Kingdom Come, because unlike a lot of you, I don't actually put them in like chronological order or by by character or anything like that. I'd like to someday, and that's a project for many weeks to do. But these were the books of the 90s that, to me, as far as, like I said, within the confines of the mainstream Marvel and DC universes, because really, despite the fact that Kingdom Come is an Elseworlds title, it's still, you know, it's not a stretch at all. I mean, this, you can see, is kind of the natural progression of the way things will go in the not too distant future. And, you know, well, at least, you know, for us, not the not too distant future. Of course, for them, you know, this is, you know, we're talking about, you know, thousands of issues from now for them to get to this age. But again, it's, these books, they brought about a new way of looking at characters, not just say, you know, how far can we mire our characters in darkness, how far can we, you know, twist the morality of these characters so that they become almost unrecognizable, because we saw a lot of that in the 90s. And that, again, is kind of the influence of the 80s. Again, you know, the influence of, you know, books like Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One and Daredevil Born Again and so on and so forth. Masterpieces in their own right, but again, it did bring about this age of extremely dark heroes, but without the without the gravity to really, of great writers and artists to really bring that point home. You know, again, it just was like this flurry of ideas. It was like dartboards, and they just were throwing ideas at them to see which ones eventually would. It was like, you know, just this tiny little dartboard, and they had like 1,000 darts to throw at it, and whichever one stuck, they were the ones that they went with. And they would wipe that, you know, they would pull out that, you know, the darts out of that board after, you know, maybe a year or so, and then throw them again, and then see, okay, well, okay, we're going to take this character in this direction now, or we're going to give this character this this arc, and it's going to change the way that they behave or that they act, at least for a little while, until we feel that it's getting too dark and we have to rein them back in or her in, whatever. So, you know, I'm sure that all of you recognize that this was a problem of the 90s. It's where the comic book industry almost, you know, imploded upon itself. The weight of all of these characters and all of these different directions and all these different creators and all of these different titles, whereas it was crushing its own industry. And, you know, of course, you know, who's to say that too many comics can ever really be a bad thing? Well, the 90s did kind of prove that too many comics is ultimately too many comics. You know, which is, you know, but, you know, out of this generation of writers, you know, of, you know, Mark Waid, of course, who's still, you know, who's doing his, at least his most visibly recognizable, you know, or most visibly celebrated works with Daredevil currently, you know, despite all of the excellent work that he's done in the past. You know, this is the first time that he's really getting his due as a creator. And, you know, Alex Ross kind of helping to form kind of these new universes, new characters for Dynamite Comics, despite the fact that I don't really care for a lot of them, you know, like Project Superpowers and everything like that. It didn't really hook me at all. But, you know, he's, you know, again, but he's still, I mean, as far as his art is concerned, he's doing some pretty magical stuff, and he's going to be returning to a fully painted book again that's going to be called Masks, which is totally right up my alley. But, again, that's a story for another time. Right now we're focusing on these books right here. Is that, again, what these books did is that they changed the way that we could perceive books for the 90s, because we have really short memories, and, you know, or at least the industry has really short memories. They don't really realize that the best books that are out there, the ones that are getting the biggest sales and the biggest acclaim and the biggest press, are the ones that are the smartest, the ones that are the best. So I mean, it was great, kind of for a while, the rise of these independent publishers that were, bringing all these new, all this new talent. People like, the people that we love today, people like Brian Bendis, people like Ed Brubaker, people like Greg Rucka, and so on and so forth. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, these are the creators that we really, really respect right now. So I mean, it really is, and a lot of that influence that we're feeling right now is due to these two books. Because, like I said, it showed the industry what it's capable of, despite the fact that they kind of forgot it for a while. So that is my take on the 90s. Love to hear your ideas. Of course, feel free to strike back below. Hit me up with some comments. Of course, it's your first time here. Welcome. Please subscribe. And glad to be doing this again, to be talking to you about comics the way that I see them, the way that I feel about them, and the way that I call them. So stay tuned. Perhaps later this week we'll get into some more stuff, because I've been kind of not on a roll lately, but I've been putting out a lot more stuff lately. And I'm enjoying it, because I think a lot of people out there, or at least some people, are really responding to it, and those are ultimately the people that that will, I think, continue some of these lines of thought, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so again, thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me for forever and a day. Thank you, Agent 42Q, for that bit. But this is James Donnelly saying goodnight for the Shadow Gallery, and reminding you to always stay in the shadows.